The morning of my 29th birthday started like any other Thursday in October, which is to say, it started with nothing. No text messages from my parents, no call from my mother at dawn, the way she used to do when I was younger. Just the soft hum of my apartment's air conditioning and the gray light filtering through my bedroom curtains. I wasn't expecting much. According to YouTube analytics, 99.3% of viewers are not subscribed. That's a huge number. By subscribing the channel that is completely free, you'll help support the channel and never miss fresh content. Over the years, I'd learned to calibrate my expectations downward, like adjusting the volume on a radio until it barely registered as sound. But I had hoped, foolishly, it seemed, that 29 might be different. That this milestone, this rare entrance into a new decade of my life, might prompt my parents to acknowledge me in some meaningful way. By noon, I'd received nothing. By evening, as I sat at my desk staring at the same spreadsheet I'd been working on all day without actually processing anything, my phone finally buzzed. A text from my mother. Coming to dinner tonight, bringing Maya. Maya, my younger sister. 2 years my junior, and according to the unspoken scoreboard that seemed to govern my family's attention, approximately 14 years ahead of me in every measurable way. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself I was an adult, 30 years away from childhood, and that my worth wasn't determined by whether my parents chose to celebrate my existence. These were things I believed intellectually. Emotionally, I felt the familiar ache of being the second choice, the backup plan, the one you include because it would be awkward not to. I chose a restaurant downtown. Nothing fancy, but nicer than the usual chain places my parents preferred. I paid the reservation deposit myself, knowing better than to expect them to. At 6:45, I was there, seated at a corner table, waiting. They arrived at 7:15. My mother came first, her face already arranged in an expression of mild irritation, as though the restaurant's existence itself was an inconvenience she'd tolerated. My father trailed behind her, his attention on his phone. And then Maya swept in between them, radiant in a way I could never quite manage, her dark hair styled in loose waves, her confidence taking up more space in the room than her actual body could occupy. My mother kissed my cheek, a perfunctory brush of lips against skin, the kind of kiss you might give an acquaintance you'd run into at the supermarket. "Happy birthday," she said, though it sounded more like an observation than a sentiment. She immediately turned to the server. "Could we have the wine list? Something expensive. We're celebrating Maya's promotion." The words hung in the air like a chandelier that had suddenly become visible. "Mom," I said carefully, "it's my birthday." She looked at me as though I'd spoken in a language she didn't recognize. "Yes, of course, but Maya just made senior director. At her age? It's extraordinary. The company practically begged her to stay when she tried to leave last year. That's the kind of success that deserves real celebration." My father nodded, still not looking up from his phone. Maya smiled apologetically, the kind of smile that somehow managed to be worse than if she'd laughed outright, and touched my mother's arm. "Mom, it's his birthday. Let's do that another time." "Nonsense," my mother said briskly. "You're both here. We'll celebrate both occasions." She turned to me, and I saw something in her eyes that I'd been seeing for longer than I cared to admit, a fundamental indifference. "Tell us about work. Are you still at the same company?" Yes. I'd been at the same marketing firm for 7 years. I'd been promoted twice. I'd won an industry award for a campaign last year. But somehow, these facts had never quite stuck in my parents' minds the way they should have. "I actually got certified in digital strategy," I began, but my mother had already turned to the server. "We'll start with the wine and the appetizers. Bring several. We have a lot to toast to tonight." The rest of the dinner unfolded like a play I'd seen before. Maya talked about her promotion, a genuine achievement. I wasn't bitter about that. And our parents asked her breathless questions about the details. They didn't ask me about my certification. My father left to take a work call midway through the main course. My mother spent more time on her phone than talking to any of us. But it wasn't until the end of dinner that the real wound was carved open. The server brought out a small chocolate cake, something I'd specifically requested without mentioning who it was for. My mother looked at it with faint bewilderment, as though it had appeared through spontaneous generation. "Oh," she said. "Right. Birthday." She didn't sing, neither did my father. Maya looked uncomfortable and started humming "Happy Birthday" in a soft voice, as if she could somehow smooth over the awkwardness through the sheer force of her good intentions. And then my mother said the words that would echo through my life like a stone thrown into a well. "You know, I've been thinking a lot about which of you really matters to the family, and honestly, sweetheart," she was looking at me now, and her eyes held a kind of tired clarity. "It's Maya. She's the one worth celebrating. She's the one we can be proud of. I'm not sure what you expected from us. You've never really been the kind of child that makes us feel that way." The room went quiet. Even the ambient noise of the restaurant seemed to pause. "Mom," Maya said sharply, "that's not—" "It's true," my mother interrupted. "I'm sorry if it hurts, but someone needs to say it. You're 29 years old and you're still working at the same mid-level position. You're not married. You don't have any children. You're not building anything. Maya is out there making an impact. Maya is someone. And I'm not?" The question came out of my mouth before I'd decided to ask it. My mother looked at me for a long moment. "No," she said finally. "I don't think you are." I remember the exact moment everything crystallized. It wasn't anger at first. It was something colder and sharper. It was clarity. It was the sudden, devastating understanding that I had spent 29 years trying to earn a love that was never conditional on my achievements, because my parents weren't capable of offering it at all. They had simply never seen me. Not really. Not in any way that mattered. But here's what happened next. What my mother didn't anticipate in her brutal honesty. Once I understood that I had nothing to lose, the question became, what exactly did I have to gain? I finished that dinner in silence. I paid the bill. I went home. And for the first time in my life, I stopped trying. The transformation wasn't sudden, but it was intentional. I spent the next 2 weeks doing something I'd never allowed myself to do before. I decided to live for myself, not as a reaction to my parents' indifference, but as a deliberate choice. I'd spent my entire life trying to be small enough that my failure to be like Maya wouldn't hurt them. I'd made myself palatable, unremarkable, forgetful. Now I decided to become unforgettable. I took my certification and started my own consulting firm. I reached out to clients I'd been too timid to contact before. I scheduled meetings. I pitched ideas. I invested in branding, in a real office space, in hiring. The fear I'd lived with, the fear that if I tried too hard I'd fail too publicly, finally transformed into something useful. Fuel. Within 2 months, I'd landed 3 major clients. Within 4 months, I'd quintupled my income compared to my annual salary. I wasn't just building something. I was building something real, something that was objectively successful by any measure. And then I stopped talking to my parents. Not abruptly. I just gradually stopped returning calls. I didn't answer texts. When my mother sent me a lengthy email about why I was being distant and hurtful, I didn't respond. I unfollowed them on social media. I was erasing myself from their lives in the way they'd been erasing me from their hearts for decades. My father called my office number after the 4th week of silence. My assistant transferred him to voicemail. "Listen," he said in his message, and I could hear genuine confusion in his voice. "I don't know what's going on with you, but this isn't funny. Your mother is upset. She wants you to come home. We should talk about what happened at dinner. I didn't call him back. Then came the escalation. My mother started calling repeatedly, at odd hours, breathing into the phone when I didn't answer. My father showed up at my office unannounced, looking bewildered, as though he couldn't quite reconcile the thriving business and the professional space with his understanding of who I was supposed to be. "I don't understand what we did," he said, and I was struck by the genuine hurt in his voice. "Your mother made one comment. She was being honest." "Exactly," I said quietly. "She was honest. And now I'm being honest. I don't need you." His face went pale. "That's not what we meant. You're still our son. Family matters." "Family matters," I repeated. "That's beautiful, Dad. That's really beautiful. You should teach that to Maya. Maybe explain it to her the way you explained my inadequacy to me." He left. He tried to apologize. He sent flowers to my office with a card that said, "We're sorry. Please come home." I donated the flowers to a women's shelter and threw the card away. But the genius of my revenge, and it was genius, cold and crystalline, wasn't in what I was doing to them. It was in what I was doing to myself. I was succeeding. I was thriving. I was becoming the kind of person that even my parents, with their limited capacity for pride, couldn't ignore. 6 months after my birthday dinner, Forbes published an article about emerging entrepreneurs in my city. My consulting firm was featured. The photo showed me in my office, and I looked capable, confident, and above all else, visible. I didn't send the article to my parents. I didn't have to. My mother found it, and she couldn't help herself. She screenshot it. She sent it to relatives. She started telling the story to her friends as though it had been her idea all along. I received a voicemail from her after she discovered the article. She sounded different, uncertain, and for the first time in my memory, something like proud. "Sweetheart," she said, "I didn't realize how successful you were becoming. We should talk. Your father and I, we want to make this right. Maybe you and Maya could come to dinner. We could celebrate your business properly. I'm sorry for what I said on your birthday. I was having a bad day. I didn't mean it." Didn't mean it. As though cruelty was just something that happened to her. Like rain. Like traffic. As though the months of silence and pain were an appropriate price to pay for her convenient revision of the truth. I didn't respond. But I also didn't avoid her. Instead, I became someone different in the world, someone successful enough, visible enough, that avoidance would have looked like pettiness on my part. I was being noble in my distance. I was above the fray. The climax came 3 months later at my sister's wedding. Maya had become engaged to a perfectly nice man named David, a lawyer, successful, the kind of man who made sense on paper and seemed to make her genuinely happy. She asked me to be in the wedding. She reached out personally, carefully, as though I were fragile. "I know things are weird with Mom and Dad right now," she said when we met for coffee. "But you're my brother. I want you there. Will you come?" I considered saying no, but I'd learned something about revenge. Its most potent form is availability. It's showing up. It's being so undeniably present that your absence would have created a hole, and your presence creates a tension. "Of course," I told her. "I wouldn't miss it." The wedding was beautiful. The kind of careful production that only families with significant resources and obsessive planning could achieve. Maya looked radiant in her dress. My parents looked happy. The kind of performed happiness that came from everything looking exactly the way it was supposed to look. During the reception, they seated me at a table with extended family. My mother kept glancing at me from the head table, and I could see her doing calculations in her eyes. My father, emboldened perhaps by alcohol, approached me during the cocktail hour. "I'm proud of you," he said. It seemed to cost him something to say it. I always was. You know that, right? What your mother said. Don't, I said quietly. Don't make excuses for her, and don't make excuses for yourself. What do you want us to do? The question hung in the air. What did I want? An apology? They'd tried and I'd refused it. Money? I didn't need it. Acknowledgement? I was getting that whether they gave it or not. The world was acknowledging me, and that had somehow become more important than their acknowledgement ever was. I want you to understand that you were wrong, I said. I want you to sit with that for a while. Really sit with it. I want you to understand what you said to me, what you've been saying to me my whole life. And I want you to know that I'm going to be fine. Better than fine. I'm going to be extraordinary. And I'm going to do it without needing you to believe in me. He nodded slowly. He looked devastated and relieved at the same time. Will you ever forgive us? I didn't answer him. I never did answer that question directly, because I realized something important. Forgiveness had never been the point. The point was that I had been forgotten, erased, considered not worth celebrating, and I had made myself impossible to forget. Later in the evening, during the toasts, Maya gave a beautiful speech about David, about marriage, about family. She mentioned my parents. She mentioned me. But what I noticed was that several people, relatives, friends of the family, congratulated me on my business achievements during the reception. They'd read the Forbes article. They'd heard the story. I was no longer invisible. My mother tried to talk to me near the end of the evening, away from the crowd, while the band was playing a slow song. I've been thinking about what I said, she began. I know, I interrupted. You've thought about it, and you've realized I'm successful, so now you've decided that you were wrong. That's not growth, Mom. That's just pragmatism. You're right, she said, and the defeat in her voice was palpable. You're right, and I'm sorry. And I felt something then. Not forgiveness exactly, but a kind of closure. Because I realized that her apology was worthless to me. Her pride was irrelevant. Her approval would never fill the hole she'd created, because the hole was never actually about her. It was about the fact that I'd given her the power to define me. I had taken that power back. The aftermath, if I'm being honest, was complicated. I didn't become the kind of person who suddenly got it all together and showed my parents that they were wrong. I didn't have a dramatic confrontation where they admitted their failures and we embraced while sad music played. Life isn't structured that way. What happened instead was this. I built a successful business. I became financially independent. I traveled. I developed friendships with people who actually chose to be around me. My parents remained in my life, but at a distance. We had awkward dinners on holidays where we made polite conversation about innocuous topics. My mother still occasionally tried to reassert her familiar patterns, but I was no longer receptive to them. Maya remained my sister, and our relationship actually improved as the years went on. Once I stopped resenting her for being the favorite, I could see her as a person rather than as a symbol of my inadequacy. She felt guilty about our parents' treatment of me, guilt I never asked her to carry. She became an ally of sorts, though I was careful not to weaponize our relationship against them. The revenge, if that's what I'm calling it, was never about hurting them in the way they'd hurt me. It was about something more subtle and ultimately more devastating. It was about making their original assessment of me look foolish. It was about succeeding not despite their abandonment, but in a way that made it clear I didn't need their love to matter in the world. But here's the truth I discovered. Buried under all the triumph and vindication, revenge tastes like ashes. Not because I'd failed in my revenge, I'd succeeded spectacularly, but because I realized in the end that succeeding to prove people wrong is just another way of letting them control your life. They're not controlling your actions directly, but they're still the center of your motivation. It took me years to rebuild my relationship with my parents into something functional, if not warm. It took me longer still to understand that they were limited people, and their limitation wasn't about me. They were incapable of seeing me not because there was nothing to see, but because they were incapable of seeing. And once I understood that their blindness was their problem, not mine, the wound stopped being infected. On my 35th birthday, I had dinner with my parents and my sister. It was casual, nothing elaborate. During dessert, my mother reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "I'm proud of you," she said. It came easier to her now, though it still cost her something. "I know," I said, and I meant it differently now. I meant that I had internalized my own pride in myself so thoroughly that hers was just an echo, something nice but ultimately optional. That's what the real revenge was. I had made their love optional. I had become someone worth celebrating, but more importantly, I had learned to celebrate myself. And on that birthday, at 35, surrounded by family that had hurt me and family that loved me well, I finally understood that the two things weren't contradictory at all. I could forgive without forgetting. I could move forward while acknowledging what happened. I could be successful not despite my parents' cruelty, but completely independent of it. The girl, the young man, who walked into that restaurant on his 29th birthday, hoping for acknowledgement, was gone. In his place was someone who'd learned that sometimes the best revenge is simply becoming the kind of person you always could have been, all along. Not for anyone else's eyes, but for your own.